How to deal with orange Retribution decks. We should probably, before we get on to that sort of thing, let's talk a little bit about the enormity of the problem. The problem you guys have probably seen is that orange Retribution decks, of course, do show up a lot in our little videos. For some reason, they captivated our local player base. Everybody seemed to find their way over to them. But what was the problem, though? Like we said, we had a viewer of ours point out that he'd like to hear strategies to deal with orange Retribution decks. But why is he asking, what's the issue? Well, to be honest, it's not necessarily that it's like the olden days. It's not like black-style Krellin, dominating the game because, simply put, there was very little defense against what he was doing. There's, of course, this isn't that. And it isn't like the Ginyu decks or the Piccolo Namekian Knowledge decks or any of those sort of in-between ones that briefly dominated the scene. Or, of course, the Reign of Terror, which was to be under Broly. No, this is something completely different. The orange Retribution decks win for three major reasons. 1. Consistency. You see, the orange-style Retribution decks are going to be horrendously efficient. They have a huge array of 2 anger cards, energy attacks, physical attacks. Like we said, they can be very varied, even depending very little on which MP you choose. We talk about the mastery itself delivering 2 anger, similar to, of course, Namekian Restored Mastery. That sort of always having 2 anger in your pocket. With so many other alternatives and drills and things, especially ones introduced in the Awakening set, you find yourself getting overwhelmed with the consistency. You can almost set your watch by it. You say, okay, Orange Retribution will now use the Mastery into the drills, and is going to pull out a necessary drill depending on the status of the match. If there's, more actions left to go, cards left in my hand, my opponent's going to go ahead and grab Checkup Drill, grab a block, like clockwork. Boring, like fighting the old Ginyu, Piccolo, Krellin decks of yesteryear. So that can be very frustrating, that awesome consistency. Finding a way to consistently anger up, or if necessary, go full-on offense. And seemingly nothing you can consistently do to actually stop them from doing that. I ran through that exact same problem. I'm right there with you. I remember when Orange Retribution came out, it was right up there with its consistency, anger, and damage output, that I considered it right about the same as Red Ascension Trunks, with running for MPPV so fast that there's not really much you can do other than try to focus in on that. There are, like we said, these aren't necessarily problems. They're very effective, and before we go on, actually, I should probably explain how we ended up here. Why is Orange Retribution, why was it so difficult for us to overcome in a lot of our matches? Why are we even having this discussion? Well, it's actually a symptom of a bigger overall problem. If anyone remembers, Awakening was not a good set affecting the balance of the game. It introduced a lot of mechanics and focuses and archetypes to the game that weren't necessarily good for the game. Like we said, Goku came out in this set, Goku broke the game. He single-handedly killed off a portion of our player base because of his right-out-of-the-box broken powers. And then, of course, abusing things like Unleashed to death, to the point where, other cards are getting changed. Like we said, Awakening just generally unbalanced the game. The whole point of Orange Retribution was to find a way to compensate for all previous Mastery shortcomings. Anybody who used to play Adaptive would come across this problem. I have a million drills, I generally don't level, and I don't have much need for anger, but I have a hard time getting to my upper levels. That's why you used to see your Devouring Drill archetypes, which just disappeared completely. Because how else could you anger up? Orange had no Mastery-based anger, so it would have to use individual cards. Without the significant card draw or consistent card draw of what you need, you're not leveling up. So that was the first point of Orange Retribution. Find a way to get you to anger up consistently. The second one was Orange decks get stage locked as their main thing that that they run up against. It's just like if you had any black style deck has a hard time dealing with anger. Pretty much all of them have a hard time dealing with anger. Every version of black, even Black Conflict, which is supposed to give you crits left and right, it still has a hard time dealing with other players' anger. It just naturally does. Black style in general. So that would be the reason Orange Retribution, like we said, had such a focus on anger nowadays, because they're just trying to deal with a long-term problem. The next issue that was addressed by Orange Retribution was getting, the stage lock. So basically it gives you a way to find a way out of stage lock situations where you can just make your next energy attack free. This can anger you up, this can damage your opponent, get rid of things like, what's that called? Like wall breaker, pushing out a big damage when your opponent shouldn't be able, when they think you shouldn't be able to throw an energy back at them because you're stage locked. So it addressed that. Also, it had another mechanic because we basically had already seen 2 different drill mechanics in the other Orange Masteries. That was where, adaptive, they just don't go away. You put them in play, they're there forever. Boring, static, extremely, what was that word? Not boring, but you could really just build up a deck full of drills. If anybody remembers Orange Adaptive 20, winning the World Championship and just having 1,000,000 drills in play, boring, right? Nothing too fancy. Adept was an interesting animal. Adept would have you, discard and rejuve some of those, upon, leveling up. Neat, but not necessarily a strategy people fresh out of Adaptive were going to embrace, at least at that point. That's frustrating, because Adept, to me, never caught on in the way that it should have. Like we said, just because it was a victim of circumstance, too many people were just used to Orange Adaptive and just being very static. The whole point of Adept was to carry and be more dynamic with your drill suite. Be able to target them from Banish, Discard, and Life deck more readily, and not just kind of pull from deck or discard and just throw them in play. Anyway, so that would be one of the key strengths here. When they're using Orange Retribution, the timing is pretty much always the same. You'll always notice that the Mastery is used either later or last, because they want to utilize that effect of pulling out the drills. So the fact that forcing a Retribution deck, with using the Mastery for leveling up, pushing in all the drills and never basically losing track of them, and using the Mastery's effect to simply yank one right back out. See, that's probably the most broken thing about the Mastery. That you think, oh, okay, well, my opponent is leveled, the drills are either going away, or they're, that's that. Basically, they have to work again to get them out. No, that would be, to me, probably the most broken aspect. I don't have a problem with making an attack cost 0. That's fine, because they still have to wait one turn to get an action again to make a use out of it, and they actually need a card with stage cost to make use of it. So that's enough of a condition to make it not so broken. Where it gets broken is the pulling out of the drills. Because the drill suite that came out in Awakening, again, we find ourselves back here, were very, very easily abused. So you'd find the obligatory to anger, transform if you change levels, shuffle in your drills and then pull out a drill, and it's always checkup drill or crying drill. I know we're all pretty thoroughly sick of seeing that card, because it just has an answer for everything. So that's a long story short, guys. The biggest strengths that you're running into is consistency in damage, output, and anger. Orange Retribution Vegeta adding in another wrinkle of the ability to constantly level up and constantly end combats where things aren't going his way, and wriggling around the putting cards in play like a blue battle readiness drill, the one that keeps your opponent from ending combat, using effects that end combat. See, forcing you to pass and then him passing is not an effect that ends combat. That's a rule of the game. That, to me, was one of the more broken things. So here we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about strategies, general strategies that are useful for all styles when confronting Orange Retribution. Then we're going to break it down a little bit per style. Known strategies that me and my buddies have worked on to deal with Orange Retribution's effective points. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start off with some general strategies. This is stuff that's going to be effective pretty much for all of your different deck types. Like it doesn't matter which style you've chosen, these strategies, generally speaking, are going to be very worthwhile. Some of those general strategies are going to be either planning to deal with your opponent's damage output, or their angering up, or both. A lot of times you're going to want to plan for both, since, just to give you an example, Orange Retribution Vegeta can go horrendously offensive and blow you to smithereens with a well-timed Gallic gun on level 4, which can easily end a game. Or they can run for MPPV, hardcore, and you not be able to catch them when they run away with it. So those are your general strategies. Are focus on either damage output or angering up or both. But speaking of those, before I get into the styled stuff, let's talk about things that can make their way into any deck. Kind of proud of this one because, so help me, all of this is found in blood, sweat, and tears. As if it were 2015, we're talking about Wallbreaker. If you are afraid enough that you need to start thinking about individual combats against Orange Retribution, you see, they're very good in the short game. That is to say that in one combat, they can easily gain a level by just manipulating just a handful of cards. If you think about it for a second, the Mastery plus 1/2 Anger Energy Attack plus Crying Drill, and they have a level. They only had to draw one of those cards. The other one had to be in play, which isn't a problem. So just think about that for a second. Wallbreaker will help you to slow down and cheat them out of individual combats. If you can cheat them out of gaining anger in that combat, they probably aren't going to be able to do much of anything to you. And if you took that defensive posture, you might have a few more blocks in your hand and able to keep those wall breakers on them. You can go up to 3 if you're paranoid enough. I don't blame you. If you really, honest to goodness, are tired of watching the Orange Retribution run away with it, do it. Go wall breaker times 3. Another one is you can go general anti-setup and drill in your card suite choice for styled stuff and not styled stuff. I guess there's only a handful of those. What I mean by that is you can have a lot of cards whose immediate or hit effect is to banish a setup or drill in play. To be honest, you have very few setups on Orange Retribution you got to worry about. It's mostly the drills. But if you do decide to, do something to their drills, some decks, like just give you an example, Saiyan style, don't do anything at all against setups and drills in play. For the most part, they generally are not, concerned with them. For this, I recommend banishing over destroying, because destroy is too easily targeted, in my opinion. Way too many abilities can pull it back out of the discard pile. I don't strongly recommend destroying their drills. Think of like Orange Refocus. How many times you can accidentally have a flow of a game just completely upend because you forgot they had a Crying Drill in their discard pile. The Orange Refocus got an anger, put out Crying Drill. Next action got an anger. Next action gained some stages. You know what I'm talking about. Basically, you lost the game because you targeted it and put it in a zone they could easily get to. If you're going to go ahead and do anything against their drill setup that's in play, carry cards that banish over destroy. Also, because we said this type of deck, this archetype, is generally focused on energy damage. Pretty much all the builds are that way. There are some physical ones, but to be honest, their damage output isn't like, off the charts. It isn't like the olden days of Broly, knocking your block off. For the most part, you're only worried about taking life card damage in the form of energy attack damage, right? That's a big thing. So in terms, if your likely opponent is likely to be, your most likely opponent is going to be an Orange Retribution player, do prepare and be more defensive minded. You can play a Berserker against them, but to be honest, you're going to get hit by Orange Fierce Attack, and your endurance is gone, like it's saying a Saiyan all-out blitz deck. You lose your endurance, and all of a sudden, all those monster hits you should have been able to shrug off. Just stop doing that. What I'm getting at is be prepared, and be prepared to take a slightly more defensive posture than you might otherwise do. In terms of ratios for blocks, this is where it's going to sound a little strange. Feel free to actually carry more Omnis or more energy blocks and physicals. In most of the physical attack cards in the Orange Retribution builds are generally so low that it's not even worth thinking about, the damage for those. They're going to throw one random charge kick here and there, one random devastating blow here and there. It's not going to be enough to matter. You can carry some physical blocks as well as you should, but please be prepared with sufficient numbers of energy blocks. It'll help you to keep from eating lots and lots of damage. Speaking of that, a strategy I actually developed quite a while before that was how to deal with the battle once you're going. Well, in terms of what you can do in combat, like we said, Wall Breaker, of course, is one of those in combat things that helps to deal with the anti-anger and stuff like that. A couple of friends of yours are going to be, because they're going to go into all builds, are going to be Shoulder Slam from Evolution. Take a good look at this card. There is no reason this deck should not have been an all-star in all the time we were playing this game. I kid you not, it did not become a thing until Orange Retribution took off. Look at it. Lower your opponent's anger 3 levels, raise your own anger 1 level, damage is AT-AT. Sometimes that's nothing, sometimes it pays off gigantic. I strongly recommend carrying 2 or 3 of these, and then as a cherry on top, it has a little bit of endurance. There's so few non-style cards that good that don't see as much love. Also, traditional, it's like it's the olden days. Devastating Blow, still good. Raise your own anger, throw a little damage at him, lower your opponent's anger 2 levels, target 3 cards. Remember we talked about that? We said, are you going to do stuff to your opponent's drills? If you damage out some drills, get them banished. There's very little Orange can do on a consistent basis to be able to pull those out. Like we said, only a handful of Orange cards directly target the banish zone. A lot of Orange Retribution builds don't even carry them. Those ones, like you got Orange, I want to say in Rage Bash, and that still has to hit to pull them out of the banish zone. Alright, so general strategies for being in combat with Orange. Like we said, you got some good card choice just in general. We're talking about, Wall Breakers, Devastating Blows, Shoulder Slams, just in general. And you've got other cards in your deck that help to deal with drills in play. Banishing, not destroying. When do you lower their anger? Great question. Orange tends to get anger in big gobs. They have a tendency to get it 2 or 3 in 1 or 2 actions. A lot of times they find ways to get around it, like throw out Disaster Drill and then use like an energy attack and get 3 anger in 1 shot. A lot of times you'll start to think of your opponent as being in a dangerous position to level up when they're at 3 anger or 4 anger. It's like, oh man, they're so close. I kid you not, your opponent is dangerous at 2 or 3. So in terms of when do you lower their anger? As soon as they have 2. That's close enough. In very little actions, they can rocket off and get to the next level, and then if they're Vegeta, just end combat. So 2 anger is plenty to start lowering their anger. I know in the olden times we didn't have to worry. 2 anger didn't mean a whole lot. Nowadays, it is that dangerous. Too few actions get them to level up. Like we said, 3 or above might be too late if you keep holding it in your hand waiting for that, I assure you. Also, if for some reason in combat you have the ability to level up, and you're like, no, I'll do this other action before I level up myself. Like I'm hovering at 3 anger or 2 anger, or what am I thinking of? 3 anger or 4 anger. Level yourself up first! It's terribly important that you're able to deal with their anger and everything. But here's the thing. Orange has cards like Orange Eruption and a million other cards that lower your anger automatically. Do not give them the opportunity. If you give them the opportunity, they will get it in their hand and they will target your anger and push it down, and now you don't have a strategy. So in terms of whose anger do you focus on first, if yours is close enough, level up in 1 action. If you're 2 anger away, 1 anger away, go up to the next level. If you're trying to race them to the top, you will strongly regret not having focused on your own anger and losing your opportunity to level this combat and watch them run away with it. This is another one. This is the Muhammad Ali Rope-a-Dope. I sometimes will recommend taking a hit even when you have a block in your hand. And you'd be like, you're insane. Taking hits when you have blocks in your hands? Yes, I meant everything I just said. You see, if an attack will do no more than 4 life cards, and there's no significant hit effect, or anything like that, take the hit. You see, your Orange Retribution player is always packing another energy attack in their hand. You know this. Don't give them the opportunity to hit you with a much bigger smackdown because you used a block on a 4 damage energy when he had an 8 in his hand. So, take the light hits. Parse it out. If you're at 0 anger and he throws a 5 life card energy attack at you and you have a block in your hand, but he's also got another card left in his hand, take the hit. You have nothing to lose. You have no anger to lose. It's fine. So those are my general strategies that are going to fit their way into any deck. Very shortly here, I'm going to go ahead and release batches of info for individual styles. Sorry to break it up like this, guys. I just don't have a lot of time. I actually have a full-time job. I do all kinds of stuff. So stay tuned to Decked.